Hi, this is Chris Coglianese, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Hey, man, it's great to have you on. It kind of surprises me that we hadn't done this earlier. We're in this group with a lot of very credentialed people, and I guess we just never had. At least I never took the occasion to say, "Hey, Chris, come on the show. Let's talk Army stuff."
Yeah, I think it just, I'm on a couple different listservs, and I think it's just episodically, like I'll have a burst of like a couple of weeks where I'm reactive on one, and then I'll just kind of
Sure.
monitor for 6 weeks, and then so it's kind of episodic.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, since I have you here, and we don't have to get into this at all, but you're an infantry officer, so I thought we would talk in the abstract just for a minute about targeting and command authority and how these things go. Because I think folks don't realize. Look, I'm an intel guy, right? And this is everybody watching. So my job would be to be part of the targeting process. Maybe I'm the analyst, maybe I'm the collector, maybe there's a whole bunch of people in there. And so if there are bad people in the area. We all know what their name. It's Muhammad bad guy, Ali bad guy, and we begin to build a dossier in this person, and we're fighting. This is combat, and so we will create a targeting package, put it on the boss's desk, right? And that's when someone like Chris is like, "Hey, who are we trying to target? What are we doing? Tell me what's going on." And then the package is presented to a guy like Commander, Coglianese, right? So he then goes, let me think about this, right? So talk a little bit about like the realities of what it takes to target and put rounds on something. It's not this wait, I'm guessing you're not a dumb automaton who only does what he's told. You have responsibility. Talk a little bit about that responsibility if you don't mind.
No, not at all. So it's interesting because we were just having a discussion. I was just having a discussion with a protege of mine who had been a lieutenant in the battalion when I was an operations officer. This is in 2007.
Yeah.
And we were talking about a specific incident that occurred in the aftermath of the six members of Congress who made the whole lawful targeting, and we're getting into a discussion about lawful but awful. So a lot of it'll hinge on what is the target's value. Is there value in developing that target and continuing to build what they call pattern of life, and letting him stay on the move so that we can continue to build additional networks, extract his network. Then there's also the value of when is the right time and place to hit the target. And the issue that came out that I was talking with a protege of mine, and we had served together, we served 2 combat tours together, and he's a current battalion commander right now, was this was back in 2007. We had rolled up one of the guys, a middle tier target guy. It come out, we rolled him up, and then the follow-on intel, and that's, I think, a lot of people have to understand, is that once you start, it can become a crescendo effect if you hit the right guy at the right time, and you can get further intel. Well, we killed the guy, and then we were going to the funeral. The funeral was going to happen. We had good intel on the funeral, and there was going to be something like 15 other folks that were on the brigade target list at that funeral. Now, here's the thing, because again, it gets into the lawful but awful. There was an unwritten, I guess, agreement. And we fought in the area I fought in 2007 was predominantly against the Shia militias, Jaish al-Mahdi, Asab al-Haq, as I call it, the Iranian MIT teams were out there, certainly. Right. And we really didn't want to hit the funeral because we kind of had an understanding with our enemies. Like when we were having a memorial service for one of our soldiers, they didn't strike our fob. We routinely took mortar and rocket fire on our fob. We were on Fob Rustamiyah, which is on the east side of Baghdad. One of the nicknames of it was Fob Rocket Mia. But they understood that sometimes there's a gentleman's agreement, and we really pushed back. My battalion commander pushed back hard on it, and we eventually we got the order, do it. It was lawful. It wasn't. It was awful though. It was, and we wound up doing it. I was C2ing it from the brigade main command post, which is at a different fob, but it was closer location wise. And then the battalion commander went on that mission on ground, and we did wind up rolling up a few guys and stuff like that. So, when you talk about targeting, it's a complex process because it's easy to get the low hanging fruit, but they're easily replaceable. You got to know who to target, when to target them, and where to target them, and what they bring. Frankly, sometimes getting the commander, it's useful. Obviously, it's never a bad thing per se, but the guys, especially in insurgency warfare, the financiers, the guy who can move the money, the bomb makers who have the technical skill sets, those are the guys who can really achieve an operational effect for at least a short period of time, more so than the commanders. In some ways, especially with the insurgents, replacing commanders for them is not as hard as people who actually have true technical expertise. The money men, the bomb makers, the guys who can run the rat lines and stuff like that.
These are decisions that are not made just wantonly. I mean, for the most part, the Secretary of Defense doesn't come down and say, kill everybody out there. That isn't normally how this works. But even then, there's lawyers involved, and there's actual professionals throughout this process. And so I think when we see it represented on the news in the current conflict with Venezuela, we're not getting the full doctrinal side of like what this looks like.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of things in life, it's overly simplified for media consumption. It's like anything, any kind of profession, law, medicine, soldiering, war fighting. It's extraordinarily simplified in the media, unfortunately. And so people think, they see something or they get a snippet or they get a soundbite or they get a headline, and the process is very, very deliberative. And there's a lot of inputs and a lot of people. Like I said, it's not just there's a very much a legal analyst. Is this guy a legitimate target? Do we really have enough? Do we have enough that we can hold him in, especially with because we would eventually turn this guy over to the Iraqis, unless he was on such a rare target list that he became an American hold. So there were some guys who were that bad. And those are the guys who might have, believe it or not, SecDef visibility. Some of the more prominent hits that were on, obviously Osama bin Laden was the most, the most well-known naturally, but Zarqawi and stuff like that, they're going to have high level MNFI commander, ISAF commander, that kind of thing. But at the division, brigade, and battalion levels, you're going to have your lawyers. You're going to look at this and say, do we have enough to hold him, so that we're not doing a whack-a-mole, which we've been accused of doing. Unfortunately, sometimes our tactics did look very whack-a-mole-ish.
Yeah. And
we roll the guy back out, and a week later he's back out on the street, more pissed off than ever. Because and candidly, sometimes we rolled up people who shouldn't have been rolled up. They were not really bad guys. They just happened to be in that milieu. It's sort of like if you lived in South Philly or you lived in Flatbush, Brooklyn, you may have been a very, with an Italian surname, you're probably going to know people who were in Cosa Nostra. It doesn't mean you're in Cosa Nostra, but you're going to have people, you're going to associate with people. You went to school with them, you next door neighbors, you went to church, whatever. And that was similar to, I've always said that watching like a movie like or a show like The Shield is in many ways a better preparatory media production to prepare for counterinsurgency warfare, especially as the war in 2006, 2007 and beyond in Iraq really became much more so than, running and gunning and strict firefights like you saw in Fallujah and Najaf and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's also true that, and we really will get off this in a second, but it's also true that if my intel is routinely bad, or my intel shop's intel is routinely bad, you're not just going to go, shoot that boat out of the water, right? Like it's not, it doesn't work like that, No. The boss, the three, everybody, the three is like the operations guy. These folks are smart, they're experienced, they've been mentored by people, they're still being mentored, so there's a lot of, the bar to get these things done is pretty high. Now, sometimes we make mistakes, because that for sure happens. Sometimes we get in the targeting officer, who's like normally an artillery type guy. He's like, I need people to kill. Line them up. Let's go. And the bar gets lowered. But that's in a hotter conflict. if it's like this right now in our current state where we don't have an active war somewhere, those rules of engagement are going to be higher than what most folks realize. And even though you're always allowed to defend yourself, you and I have both sat in the meeting when some young kid had killed somebody, and the commander's just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because absolutely could prosecute and ruin this kid's life. I absolutely could exonerate, because it is all gray area. And so just, I wanted folks to hear that from professionals. And if you want to expand on any of that, feel free to.
Otherwise, yeah. So when I was in S3, when I was an operations officer again in 2007, and that was the time for all the combat tours I've had in Baghdad, Samarra, Afghanistan, and Jordan, and a few other places. That was the one that was the most substantive in terms of just sheer violence on a regular routine basis. But anytime we had an incident where we would we fired and killed a guy, the commander would always initiate a commander's inquiry, or even a 15-6, depending on how much violence occurred per se in that incident. And at first the soldiers were very like, oh, I'm being investigated for doing my job. And the commander spent a lot of time trying to communicate to the soldiers, no, I'm doing this for your protection. Because what I'm trying to do is make sure if this comes back or something, somebody wants to churn this up. So we look into it, and it's not anything, it's not some exhaustive, 2-year investigation. It'd be a captain would do it. It'd be a couple of days, take some sworn statements, kind of put together a quick slide, a quick executive summary. And what it is now you have a legal foundational document that establishes the specific incidents, so that Soldier X, Private First Class Schmuckatelli, killed a bad guy. And here's the circumstances that led to this. This wasn't some wanton murder. He didn't execute this guy. This was a legitimate target. Everything was on the up and up. And what it did is it allowed us to be able to say, if somebody wanted to raise it up later on, here you go. It's been investigated. And we, unfortunately, whenever you're a soldier and somebody tells you you're being investigated, it naturally has a negative connotation.
Sure.
And that's unfortunate. But, my commander, Jeff Sauer was his name, was very, very diligent about really doing that to protect the soldiers, because he understood the nature of the war we were fighting, the characteristics of the war we were fighting.
It can also be that the unit learns from that incident, because there's all these unique things. We had a bunch of MRAPs driving through town. MRAPs, everybody are like moving mobile homes, armored everywhere. And they got a little lost. Patrols get lost all the time. You're trying to, anything can happen. And so they went under an underpass, and MRAP 1 went under no problem. MRAP 2 went under no problem. Keep in mind, everybody, there's gunners on top of these mobile homes that are armored. And 1 point's forward, 1 point's to the left, 1 point's to the right, 1 point's back. So I think it was the third MRAP hit the overpass, and it cleaved the turret off, and it killed the gunner as he was dragged out. Amazingly survived to get put on the Black Hawk and sent to get aid, but he didn't make it. But that necessitated this investigation. And so that lieutenant in charge of that patrol all of a sudden now was responsible for this thing. He wasn't even in the vehicle, right? Yep. This is what everybody's got to understand. This is what, this is why you do these 15-6s, -6 investigations, is to let's understand what happened. And what came from that is preventable, but, inevitable. It happened. We were no longer just going to drive under underpasses. We were going to understand, we were going to map all of them. And it probably had happened before, right? But we can't ever track all this stuff. And so, you had to go out and ensure, if it was close, and measure and make sure that you could get under so you didn't kill somebody. That's the level of detail that the military goes through, and to try to understand what happens. Did that kill that lieutenant's career? I don't know. Probably not, because it's an accident. We all get that. But someone's responsible. And in this case, that lieutenant was the person who had to withstand that investigation.
Yep. I saw it multiple times. When I was there, and when I first got to Baghdad in 2006, we were going through the RIP TOA, and elements of 4th Infantry Division were coming out as Multinational Division Baghdad, and 1st Cavalry Division, whom I served with for 6.5 years, was coming in. And what had happened was 2 brigade deputy commanding officers, so 2 very senior lieutenant colonels, both former battalion commanders, were riding in the same vehicle, and that vehicle got hit with an IED. Now, I happened to be friendly with one of them. Actually, he had been an upperclassman in my company at West Point many years prior, and they were both killed. And so you just lost 2 lieutenant colonels in what? And the CG, J.D. Thurman, was the CG of 4th Infantry Division, which was still had responsibility. Man, he was hot about that, and he made the rules. He made a massive rule change because that was how we were doing it. So you're doing your what they call RIPTO, relief in place, transfer of authority. It's about a 10-day process for the conventional forces. It's about a 10-day process where you're turning over the sector. And he said no more. It was inefficient, but it actually was to preserve so we wouldn't lose 2 senior leaders just like that. And we also had a scenario like either a day or 2 prior or after, we had 2 battalion S3s, the outgoing and the incoming. The outgoing S3 was killed in action. He was probably 5 days from going home. The incoming S3 was wounded. Yeah, unfortunately, know too many of those stories of guys getting killed on their last week or last day in some cases. And then the incoming S3 was wounded so severely, he had to be medevaced out of theater and he was done. So that creates a scramble. And as for your readers who are not, or your listeners, sorry, who are not in the military, these more senior leaders, they're not just anybody you can throw into that. There's a level of experience, education that goes into being able to manage that level of responsibility and know the tricks of the trade that you have to be managing to keep all those operations going. And so that was, again, to your point about that, a lesson learned of how do we mitigate risk? How do we, change our tactics, techniques, and procedures so that we're less likely. You're never going to completely eliminate risk, but you're less likely to have something bad happen.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the polling place stuff. So for everybody watching, one of the things that Chris has done is be the lead official at a polling place, and we talk a lot about election fraud. We just had some in between elections. We're going to have midterms here coming up pretty soon, and I guess when I think about these things from my professional background, and you give me the right money and target me in the right places, I can make a difference. If I want it to be less than legal, and flip voters, results. I mean, if we are to believe the rhetoric we hear on TV, where there are no holds barred, to include taking a presidential candidate off a ballot in numerous states, then I don't blame anybody that's like, well, I don't trust any of it. And I'll say this, and I'm shut up and let you talk about this. I know that when I vote, I live in California. I cannot show my ID. It's illegal to do that. And if I vote, I'll get a thing. Hey, your vote was counted. Was it? I have no idea. No one closes the loop and says, and here's how your vote was tabulated, right? I just have to trust the system does that. And frankly, I don't. And not because I dislike Democrats or Republicans, just because I don't trust those systems, because I see a lot of things that go wrong. However, I also know my neighbors are wonderful people, and the ones that work in polling places are going to be wonderful people, and everybody's trying to do the right thing. So I get conflicted, man, on how secure elections are and how exploitable they are, especially when we see all the way up to murderous intent and actions to influence politics. It's crazy to me. So help me understand what it's like, at least at the polling place.
So I retired from the Army in June of 2022 after 30 years. And then I like you, Pete, I heard, you hear all this rhetoric about this, that, and the other thing about, election integrity and stuff like that. And that's a big issue, even still here in Texas. So I says, well, I could sit there and just complain about it and write emails about it and talk in my own little circle about it, or I can be part of the solution. I can't fix the entire thing, but I can be part of the solution. So I figured out how to get involved as an election. I started out as an election clerk in the November of 2022 election here in Texas, which was a big election. We had the governor running, the attorney general. It was a big election here in Texas, especially statewide. The even year elections are always big elections because you have.
Did you vote while you were? Did you vote while you were an officer, or did you abstain?
Sometimes. It depended. When I lived in Texas, the first time when I lived in Texas, when I was up at Fort Hood, I generally did vote because Texas had become my residence. I didn't generally vote absentee. When I was in subsequent assignments in Hawaii and Washington State, it was not it wasn't laziness, but I was I kind of went through that whole George C. Marshall, yes, it's my obligation as a citizen. No, it's my obligation as an officer to be completely apolitical and stuff like that. So I was kind of always in that that dynamic tension.
It's a very common. I ask because I don't think folks realize I basically never voted when I was deployed. If I was home, sure, I'd vote. And that's at my best. Sometimes I probably skipped it, but yeah, like a lot of us go, hey, I don't live there. I'm not going to vote on issues because I'm not read up. I shouldn't be influencing who my boss is, etc. So I'm glad you took that aside with me because I don't think people understand that a lot of us don't vote.
But once I settled back into Texas and moved here in 2019, I still had 3 more years of active duty till I was going to hit my mandatory retirement. I started voting because I lived here, and I started voting especially because of local issues that impacted me. And then naturally, I cared. I did care. So again, it was a dynamic tension. So I got involved because I said, I can sit and complain about it, or I can get involved. And I was in a position, the other thing too, is I was in a position financially that I didn't have to have a full-time job after retiring. A lot of people are not so lucky as I was. My wife and I are with our financial situation, and I was able to genuinely be retired, and I could work odd jobs as I wanted to, and for some extra money, or because something was interesting or something like that. So I got involved with it and got to see, well, what is the process? What are the safeguards? Because you hear, like I said, you hear a whole lot of things. Yeah. And I can only speak for Williamson County, Texas. I have my suspicions about other places, and I know a little bit more about other places in Texas, but based on what I've seen and what I've had to enforce as a judge, because eventually after I was a clerk for a few times, then I became an election judge. And Texas, it sounds a little more grandiose than, chief of poll watch, whatever. But there's a reason for that title of being a judge, because you do actually have district judge authorities, especially on election day, when you're officially the judge. Now, in early voting, you're not technically the judge. During the early voting period, you're officially the deputy early voting clerk, but you're the de facto judge in all but name and like one small authority otherwise. So people they should always ask the questions. And I think that we owe it to our fellow citizens, to the polity, to really be aware as judges and within reason be able to explain some of this. I always joke with some of my clerks. I'm like, you guys are here to get the voters, process the citizens, get them voting and stuff like that. I'll give the free civics lessons as needed when I have people who want to ask questions. I think Texas has, at least as my experience and what I've seen, and I've researched the law. I actually read, because I'm a nerd, Texas election code and especially the relevant parts, because again, you sometimes have voters who want to challenge you. And when you can show them, boom, here's the law, here's here's a specific citation, it shuts down the people who want to try to be agitators for one reason or another. And I will tell you, that's a bipartisan issue. There's agitators on both sides who are, everything's a conspiracy and stuff like that. So Texas actually has a pretty good amount of safeguards. So one, we have a 30-day registration period. You must be registered for that election 30 days prior. Now, your registration rolls over, so I don't have to re-register. So myself, for instance, I don't have to re-register every time. But if you just moved to Texas or you just moved to Williamson County or whatever, you have to re-register to vote in Williamson County. And we do countywide registration in Texas. And that's an important factor, because I'll talk about that in a little bit, is because that creates a little bit of a dilemma for some folks who've moved within Texas. So we have that 30-day registration. The other thing is we have mandatory photo ID in Texas. Now we have there are 7 types of ID that we will accept. So the most common is a Texas driver's license, and it has to be a Texas driver's license, passports, handgun license, military ID. So those are the most common. There's a couple of other rare ones. Voter ID. There's actually a voter ID card you can get, but I think somebody told me there's one person in all of Williamson County who has this one specific type of ID. But there are 7 specific types of IDs that you can have in Texas that we will accept as a voter ID. And I think that that's important. And then we have countywide registration. So you can vote. There's not a book or anything like that. You can come. We have countywide registration and countywide voting. Now that's going to change a little bit in the upcoming primary. We're going to go to a more precinct-based voting for election day only. But for early voting, it's still countywide voting. So we have a networked system of your voter registration. So you come in, you're a voter, you show your ID. Let me see it. We verify that's you, yes, and then we can scan it. And the voter IDs are generally, with about 98% likelihood, tied in with the driver's license. So the driver's license is the easiest one to work with. Sure. But if you don't have a driver's license, use a passport or military ID or handgun license, then we will manually input your number. We verify your address. You have to tell us your address. Not what's on your driver's license. You have to verbally tell us your address, because that's an important factor too, because that makes sure we give you the right ballot. Because with countywide voting, you live in say, Georgetown. Well, Georgetown, this last election here in November, most people just had the constitutional amendments that we just had in Texas up for vote. But there were some local elections. So if the polling site I work at is in Round Rock, Texas, if you lived in Round Rock, you just had the constitutional amendments. But if, say, you live in Leander had a council race, a very contentious council race up. So it would see it, boop, it would determine what precinct you're in, what polling, all by your address and stuff like that. And then you would get the ballot. You would get a slightly different ballot than the one I might have. Again, there are a number of safeguards when you mark. So we changed it this last election. We went to a written ballot. And what I mean by that is a hand marked ballot. We print out a full size thing and you mark it just like the old Scantrons from when you and I were younger men, taking the SAT or taking a test in high school or whatever, a multiple choice test. And then now we were one of 3 counties that did it. Eventually, the rest of Texas is going to catch up. It was us, Williamson County. It was Travis County, where Austin's at. And I can't remember. I want to say it was Tarrant County or Denton County up north, but I can't remember. I used to remember. So there was a 3rd county that did it also. Might have been Harris County. I can't remember for sure. Anyway, and then so you mark it. Then you take it to a scanning device. And what it does is, it optically scans the ballot, and then it deposits it into a bin inside the machine, inside the actual scanning machine that is triple locked. And to open it, it is almost like a nuclear release procedure in many ways. It has to be me, it'll be the field service tech, and then to open the ballot bin, I have to have a sheriff's deputy, because he'll have the key. Like I have one key, the field tech will have another, and then the sheriff's deputy will have another. So to actually pull the physical ballots out, if we have to do a ballot swap. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the machine that scans the ballot is not in any way connected to the internet. All the data is saved on a hard data stick, which then at the end of the voting period, at the close of either early voting or election day, the judge goes through an elaborate shutdown procedure, takes that, puts it into a secure bag, zip ties it, and that it specifically says it has to ride with you on the front seat when you turn in that thing. So there is no hacking ability. People are like, oh, can I, this can be hacked and stuff like that. No, it can't. Not through any means of the internet per se. And then what they do is they take the physical ballots. We have to also turn those in, and that's a double lock procedure, zip tied locks, serial number zip ties on it and stuff like that. Then after the election, there is a physical count of about 10%, and they bring in selected number of judges. I've done this before. I did this after the 2024 presidential election, where we do a validation, if you will, a reconciliation. And it's only a certain number of precincts, a certain number of voting or elections. Yeah. So it might be the president. So there are a lot of, again, and I can only speak for Texas, and I can only speak specifically about Williamson County. There are a number of safeguards in place. Now, one other thing I'll mention, there are, I talked about the validity of your address, or if you move in Texas. So if you move in Texas, so previously you lived up in, say, Tarrant County up near Dallas, right? But then 3 weeks before the election, you move to Williamson County. Now you're still registered to vote in Texas. The problem is you're not registered in Williamson. So what we have is a mechanism to do what's called a limited ballot. During early voting, you can go to one location in Georgetown, which is the county seat, and you can do a limited ballot, which will be a meshing of the ballot you would have in, if you previously up in Tarrant County, and then the one you would have in Williamson. So obviously things like federal offices, statewide offices, those kind of things, constitutional amendments and stuff like that. The other thing I would tell you, and a lot of people don't know, is, and I categorize it this way, there's a difference between casting a ballot and voting. Most people, I would say 95 plus, 98% of people, it's one and the same. They get their thing. There's no muss, no fuss. They cast their ballot and it counts their vote right away because it's counted in the system. And it shows you there's a digital screen. Yes, you don't get a receipt per se, but what you do get is it shows up and you can look at it. It is a public record. When you vote, it's a public record and it's updated every day during a voting period. So you can see that you voted. Now, in terms of how you voted, that is a secret and that's deliberate. But to go back to my point, so there are mechanisms. So Pete, if you were to show up here in Texas during an election and you wanted to vote or you wanted to cast a ballot in Texas, if you came to my polling site, I would obviously do everything possible to discourage you. But if you says, hey, I just moved here, okay, fine. We will give you what's called a provisional ballot. So there's a whole series of mechanisms. It's a very laborious process, but I would give you what's called a provisional ballot. And you go out, you would mark it, and you don't put it in the normal machine. As a matter of fact, the machine will specifically reject it because it has special markings on it. It will kick it out. You will give it back to me as the judge. We go through what I call a little origami. We fold the ballot up a bunch of times. We put it in a security envelope. Then it goes into another envelope and it's sealed. You seal it. And then I have a bunch of information that I have to fill out. You'll fill out some information in the front. I fill out a bunch of information in the back to where I can literally write, this person claims to have just moved here, has no proof of identification that he actually lives in Texas, is not registered in Texas. Now, I won't tell you per se, because I'm forbidden to how I think that would go.
Right.
Realistically, you're probably not, your vote is not going to get counted. So then all the provisional ballots are then collected and then they go before a ballot board. And then the ballot board is a number of election officials throughout the county. And then they literally adjudicate every single ballot. That's a provisional ballot. Some of them get accounted for one reason or another. There's a glitch in the system or whatever. But many times they are rejected. They are rejected. So again, there's a number of safeguards in the system. It's about working as an election official is a balancing act because you want to help the voters. You don't want to make it so onerous that voting is, this laborious. You have to give a blood sample and all that. We don't want to make it that hard, but we also have a responsibility to protect the polity, to make sure that people are being honest and that my vote is not being discounted by somebody who's not registered to vote or not a legal voter or is not even a citizen. That's the other thing too, is you cannot be registered to vote in Texas unless you are a US citizen. So again, a number of safeguards in place. And is it perfect? No, it'll never be perfect. There are some savvy people out there, but the numbers, I can tell you this, the last election in 2024, the main election, the presidential election in the entire state of Texas, there were 33 instances of voter fraud, in-person voter fraud in the entire state. Something like 6 million ballots were cast. Now, mail-in balloting, and the Attorney General here in Texas, Ken Paxton, there's a really good video of him speaking at the Heritage Foundation a couple of years ago about that. That's the area that probably needs a lot more tightening up, because there's a lot of room for perfidy there in mail-in ballots. But I think Texas is getting much better at closing that gap down. It had to expand because, we're still all in the COVID, hangover in some respects. So anyway, I appreciate you letting me have the long soliloquy here.
It's essential, because there's a lot of intention here to protect the rights of voters. We have that, and I realize that, like, when we say there's a balance is never easy. You're like, right. So you're trying to create access. You're also trying to protect, the demands of it. And you and I have both probably worked in, protecting other elections, like in Iraq, for example. And we don't go to those measures here. I mean, it's a lower bar here, and that's fine, right? Like every county, every state, they're all going to choose different things. One of the things we have here in California is we have proximity to Nevada and Arizona, and a lot of dual houses across state lines. And I have not talked to anybody who has a command enough to say, oh yeah, no, we protect against any kind of double voting, of course, right? Because why would California care about Arizona's voting process? Why would Arizona care about California's? And so there's a number greater than 0 of people that have voted on both sides of the state line. So
sure,
that has happened. Texas is huge, though, so maybe you guys don't have that kind of problem.
Well, I mean, if you get into some of the border areas, and what I mean by border is not so much the Texas-Mexico border per se, but, we obviously border, Louisiana, Oklahoma to the north and stuff like that. So, it could be a factor, but again, there's mechanisms so that, okay, we'll give you a ballot. If you insist, we will absolutely give you a ballot. But that doesn't mean your ballot will be counted and you will therefore vote. So, now, could someone still maintain their registration in Texas and, be living in another state? Yeah, I guess they could. I mean, legitimately living, not like a college student or something like that. Yes, that could happen. I don't know for sure what the mechanism is to check that someone has moved. But that's another thing is, so for instance, we actually do have a mechanism in Texas. If you, so you get a voter card. Again, this is how you get your voter card, your voter registration certificate. It's a card, and it comes in the mail. But say it doesn't, it gets returned to the election office. What they do is they put your voting status in suspense. Now, it's not as onerous as it sounds, but what it does is it forces you, the next time you come in to vote, to have to fill out what's called a statement of residence card. And it takes about 2-3 minutes to fill it out. And what it does is it reestablishes communication with the voter and the election department. And then it says, because in some cases people move within, or many cases people, I've had this happens all the time. I've lived in the same house for 10 years and I go, okay, do you remember getting a voter card? They go, no, I don't. I says, do you have a community mailbox? Yes. I says, here's what I bet happened. Your voter card got put in the wrong mailbox. The person looked at it, says, I don't know who this is. They put it in the return box. The post office sends it back. So what it is the election department doesn't know, but all they do know is they got your voter card back in the mail. So now what they do is they put you in suspense. All this does is, again, this is another mechanism to reestablish, because people don't normally say as soon as they move, all right, I got to cancel my voter registration in Round Rock, Texas, because now I live in wherever. Some people do, and there are heroic citizens, but it's the same way. As we have millions and millions and millions of voters, there's always room for people to do the bare. People are going to do the bare minimum. People are not as tuned in on what they should be doing. It's a complex law. The processes are very complex. When I got involved in this, I'm kind of an expert on this stuff, and I'm like, my God, some of this is, but those complexities are there for a purpose, and that is to safeguard the process and achieve that balance. Like we talked about, you got to have that balance in this. You're never going to have perfect. It's never going to be close to perfect, but if you can get it into the 0.1 or below percent thing, you're not going to really be able to turn an election with that kind of percentage. Yeah,
yeah. At least that's what we hope.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
You made the point about did my vote really count? I deal with that literally every voter, because we make sure when they put their ballot in the machine, you'll see it'll spin on the screen, and we tell people stay here just a second, watch, and then you'll hear the ballot drop into the box, and it'll see on the screen your ballot has been counted, and we make sure that people see that it has been counted. And that they have to rely that the mechanism, there has to be a certain amount of trust in the system. It doesn't have to be, it's trust but verify, but there has to be a certain amount of trust. All the election workers take an oath. I'm, as the judge, I'm in theory criminally liable if there's any sort of, I have a very tight mistake tolerance of the number of ballots that are off. It's minuscule. It's not zero, but it is minuscule. And it gets real complicated if you have those kind of issues. So people the people who do this take it very, very seriously.
Yeah, man, that's powerful stuff. In the again, it depends on where you live and everything else, right? We could have 50 of these conversations, and they would all be unique and with different levels of comfort. If you were to vote in California and you went to pull your license up, they'd say, no. Against the law, can't do that, right? We have mail-in. We love mail-in voting here. And listen, California is a crowded place. You guys have a lot of people. We have more people in a smaller state, even though our state is gigantic. So it's nice to not have to go wait in line for hours if you can just drop your ballot in the mail. I don't blame anybody for that. And so there's a lot of ways to skin this cat that would make other people uncomfortable with how California, for example, chooses to skin its cat, or any other place. This is tough stuff. Go ahead.
You brought your point up about in IDs, right?
Yeah.
So in my brother, I grew up in New Jersey. My brother and his wife, my sister-in-law, still live there, and we were talking about. I was up visiting him about a couple months ago, and we were talking about it. I was telling him a little about what I do, in this. And, I says, talk about the role of the sheriffs and the constables, that kind of thing. And he's like, oh no, he says in New Jersey, they don't even want, they tell police officers don't vote in uniform and stuff like that. I mean, we have cops routinely come in full up. They're coming on shift, going off shift, or maybe they're still on shift, who knows? And they come in and vote. And I'll have the sheriff will periodically just show up, the sheriff's deputies, and because I'm pretty friendly with them, obviously you see them a bunch of times, election after election. So, they'll hang out for 15, 20 minutes and chit chat just to kind of keep everything on the up and up. Because again, we in Texas have authority to order the arrest of people. I've never had to do it. I've come daggone close on more than a few occasions with people with cell phone and recording devices. So I don't have, we're not allowed to have any cell phones or recording devices in the net. We do. People keep it in their pocket and stuff like that. But I've had people, I've had to tell people to get off the phone 9 times out of 10. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, whatever. Okay.
Right.
But I've had people who were insistent, no, you can't make me turn my phone off. I'm like, oh, yes, I can. And I've had a couple of times where I've had to very seriously, ma'am, you can turn your phone off, or I can have you arrested. It's your choice. And it's a $500 fine. It's a Class C misdemeanor. And, and I mean, I remember one woman, her husband was yelling at her, put the damn phone away. And man, she was just insistent. People cannot take pictures. They're not even, they can't even use them. The biggest one is people have their notes on their phone. That's the most common one. We make them go outside. Here's a piece. We'll give them a piece of paper. We'll give you something to write with. You got to transcribe your notes. So again, that's another voter safety and voter privacy concern. So again, Texas does it very, very well, I think, in terms of trying to achieve that balance. There's other states that are just, I hear stories from, like I said, you in California, my brother in New Jersey, and I'm just, people in Texas would be like, are you kidding? Having a cop having a cop in a polling site is intimidation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you know, there are people out there who live in very different, you know, subcultures of America.
You guys can walk into the state capitol with a gun on your hip, and you don't get searched. The person who comes with no guns has to be searched.
Yes,
that would blow our California minds. Like, what do you mean?
yeah, I mean, you see it. I mean, now the interesting thing is, so here's the one place you actually can, one of a few places you can't have a gun in a polling site. The only ones who can have a gun are licensed peace officers. So not even a concealed.
Sure.
So we have signs about that, and you know, people are like, "Well, we're a constitutional carry state." I says, "I understand that, sir. I'm very aware of that. Yeah. I'm a very pro Second Amendment. I own plenty of guns myself. You cannot have it. I can't even have one as the judge unless I am a licensed peace officer. Now, if I'm a licensed peace officer, I am allowed to have a gun as the judge, but I'm not a licensed peace officer." So yeah, I mean, again, you know, there's people who come to Texas and they lived in other places, and it's like, man, you know, I think that what started this was an email I sent to our mutual listserv that we're on, where I had a voter, and I said, "Man, this is Texas." You know, she's like, "Well, in Connecticut, and I voted in Connecticut, and man, this is Texas. This isn't Connecticut." Yeah. You know, and people have to understand we have our own laws, and that's for a good reason. We want to have 50 sovereign states.
Yeah, right. However, comma, ... It doesn't mean that the person from Connecticut trusts the Texas process or the Iowa process and I'm just picking states at random, everybody, right? And so when we look at ourselves as the US, as voters, and we're just talking the voting process. We're not talking about the other ways that our democracy is constantly being attacked by people wanting to grab power, because that's how power is. It's delicious and fun. So does Texas have confidence in, say, Tennessee's voting process, or Iowa's, or Ohio's? And do we have enough knowledge to even know if we should have confidence in it? Because I do know a couple people that have run places. It's all different. And there's all kinds of different stories. And as you know, there's a lot of chaos on election day.
You know, this is where it gets into a, you know, it's a states' rights versus, you know, federalism. It's a federalism argument. There has to be a certain number of federal parameters, but ultimately the states are as sovereign bodies. I mean, we forget that they're not, our 50 states are not administrative subdivisions. They're not provinces. They are legitimate sovereign entities, and by the Constitution have the right to create their mechanisms for running their own elections. And now they have to be responsive to federal law, you know, the supremacy clause and all those kind of things. And you've heard, you know, we hear that with the immigration debate a lot now, with with ICE going in there, and you hear a lot more people talk about the supremacy clause. You can't do so. That's, you know, this is somewhat related. However, the federal government can't overreach and say this will be de facto. So they have to put minimum parameters around it. So, you know, the Voting Rights Act. And so there's no poll taxes, there's no tests and stuff like that. So, you know, I mean, that's how it is. But how the mechanism for how you run the election, you're right. At the end of the day, Texas can only worry about Texas and do what its part is to ensure that there's integrity in that, because it ultimately, but you know, when it comes to the federal elections that we all take part in, yes, I mean, are there concerns that, you know, the policies and the laws in voting in California are potentially disenfranchising me in Texas, because California has much more loose, very loose constraints, almost no constraints on voting, and therefore it disenfranchises my vote in Texas. I think that's a concern. And I mean, I think that potentially gets sorted out in the courts. We've seen, you know, how many elections wind up going to some sort of a court case. At some cases, even up to and including the Supreme Court. I think that the attorney generals will battle it out at times when but you know, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think you are either, but you get into one of the big things is standing. Is where is the standing for me to adjudicate that, to have that case adjudicated? And at the end of the day, we want to have our states be sovereign, and the way to fix this is to win elections. Candidly, it's to win elections. If you win elections, you get to start dictating how things are done. And we see this in California on one side, and we see it on Texas on the other side. Is you have a very blue dominated state, you have a very red dominated state, and very different philosophies of how a state government should run.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, that's true. And both of those governments, they run. Like the other side may say no, but, and I can speak about California. A very, 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 very complex state to govern. LA County has a snow-covered peak and a beach in the same fucking county. That's just repeat that across the entire state. It is hard. We have a lot of blue-collar people. We have a lot of Democrats. We have a lot of Republicans. We have a lot of people in the middle. It is not easy. We have big problems trying to move water, retain water, protect wildlife. Oh my God. Like it's very, very, very challenging. And I imagine Texas is just the same thing. I mean, the desert.
Some of those issues you just brought up, are very, again, you're dealing with the two largest populated states, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, it's very possible in the next 25 years, Texas could actually overtake California if there's, continued reverse migration. It's possible. I'm not saying for sure, but it's getting close in terms of electoral college. Every 10 years, we pick up a few more, and California loses one or two, and we pick up two or three, and before you know it. But you brought up water. I mean, that's a huge issue. I just did a couple of recent political events here in Texas, and some of the candidates spoke specifically about water rights. The Texas Agricultural Commissioner, that's a huge issue here in Texas. And we're in the same way. I don't know, in terms of mountains per se. I don't, but we have the coastline. You have you have really, the joke is you can drive for 15 hours in Texas and still be in Texas. I mean, that's how big this state is from east to west. It's enormous. And even
Texas
north and south
is so big. El Paso, to a lot of people, is not even in West Texas. It goes beyond west.
It's actually right. It's actually in a different. It's actually in the mountain time zone. It's actually in a whole different time zone completely, because it's so far to the west. I mean, I
can drive to. I think this is true. I can drive to El Paso from my house, and you're basically at the beach in California, faster than I think I can drive from El Paso to Dallas, or they're very comparable, if that. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Oh, absolutely. My brother lives in New Jersey, and I live just north of Austin. I live like 15 minutes north of Austin. And for me to drive to San Antonio is the equivalent of, from him where he lives in New Jersey, to drive to Baltimore. I mean, right? I mean, you look at the proximities of states, and that's just to San Antonio. Like one of my daughters lives in San Antonio, and I have a couple friends and stuff like that. And I mean, that's no joke of how big the state is. So you do have these complex urban, you have Austin, which is just a hair under 1 million people right now. Dallas, Houston, hell, Williamson County right now is at about, and I was talking with Congressman John Carter, he's my congressional representative. And I was talking to him a couple of weeks ago at an event. And he said, in about 20 years, we're going to have 1.5 million people just in Williamson County. And, people look at like Round Rock and Leander and Cedar Park, and they're enormous towns, hundreds of thousands of people. But outside of Texas, a lot of people don't know them. So that, you tell people, I live just outside of Austin, because everyone's, I know where Austin is. But you look at the size of some of our towns and the population growth that's going on here, it's off the chain here in Texas.
You didn't even mention San Antonio, which is gigantic. I mean, it's Texas got a lot of people. Orange County, granted, physically large county, 3.5 million people at any given point in time, often 4 million. Just souls in our county, and again, mountains to beach. It's crazy. So I appreciate you spending time on this. If there was just really briefly, because I want to make sure I got into the show right at 10 o'clock, but if there was one thing that you could change, like you can go to the boss man, you can go talk to President Trump right now and say, can you change this one thing that would be good for everybody in terms of election security or confidence in elections? Is there one thing that you could recommend?
It would have to either be, I would have to say voter registration and citizenship verification. No more same day registration. I don't know, 30 days might be onerous, might be a little onerous, but there has to be some mechanism to verify that people are registered and that there's a citizenship verification, because that's the issue, where we want to, that's how you minimize my disenfranchisement in Texas with a California or New Jersey or someplace like that,
Sure.
a much more blue state. I would say you have to really neck down the voter registration mechanisms. Everything else will start to take care of itself there. Otherwise, photo ID is so contentious. I don't know why. It's ridiculous. You can't buy liquor. You can't buy a daggone drink.
Fly on a plane.
Yeah, it certainly can't get on a plane, but and frankly, the way the whole voter ID thing is, photo ID is frankly insulting. I think the way that it's characterized is, I would be insulted if I were a minority and unable to get a photo ID, for God's sake. But I think that you can really kind of neck in voter registration in such a way that you can probably reduce some of the potential shenanigans that go on out there.
Yeah. It's a crazy thing, man. Chris, I appreciate it. Let's get back and talk again about all of this stuff, because it's fascinating. Maybe we'll grab someone from an official from another place, from another state or something. But I appreciate you coming on. Anything in closing before we wrap it up?
No, I'm just big football game tomorrow, Army versus Navy. It's it's called America's game. It gets a little cliched, I see some of the announcers with some of their stuff, but it's a great. I think it's one of the great traditions, and I hate to say it, it's probably the last pure football game going on, because you have two teams going against each other, and Air Force to some degree also, the Air Force Academy. Neither of them are in the NIL, so you're talking about true amateur football players who have virtually no chance of going to the NFL, but you get to see, in some years, you see some extraordinary. Last year, the Army quarterback was like 6th in Heisman voting. This year, the Navy quarterback is probably going to be in around 5th or 6th in Heisman voting himself. Navy's got a really good quarterback this year. Obviously, I'm partial to Army naturally, but I always enjoy that and the camaraderie that comes with it, with both friends of mine who are Naval Academy grads and certainly all the West Point Army grads out there too. So, I'd encourage people, watch the game and you're going to see some very, very impressive young future officers out there on both sides of the field.
I love it, man. Thank you very much. Everybody, I'll see you on in a few minutes with another episode. Chris, I will see you later.
Yeah, take care.